Reading books is quite literally the best way you can learn. They're concise, they don't try to grab your attention like everybody does on social media, on YouTube or TikTok. Everybody's trying to grab your attention. But most of the well-known books that you've heard about, like How to Influence and Influence People, 48 Laws of Powers, they've been written with a purpose, to pass on their message. So we can both agree that reading is pretty valuable, but most people don't know how to read. They might be able to read the physical words like how to win friends and understand it, but most people don't read, learn, remember, and then implement into their lives, which learning is basically just changing your input presented the same scenario. And I've read countless of books as a 15-year-old. I've been reading How to Influence and Influence People, and the first ever book I read was Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I'm gonna give you all the secrets that I learned through all those 3 years, from the first ever book that I read as a 12-year-old, the Rich Dad Poor Dad, to me now reading many books and remembering them and actually applying what I learned. And the first thing is picking the right book, because I remember when I was in school, and like I told you, the first ever book that I read was Rich Dad Poor Dad, just one of the series, one of the tiny books, this one to be exact. And I was reading it at school, and it was talking about assets and liability, but I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't really care that much. Like, yeah, it was kind of interesting. It was teaching me stuff that were pretty useful, like assets, liability, how the rich think, how the poor think. But I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't really care that much. At the time, I was like interested in other stuff. Fast forward a few months, I walked into my barber shop, and I remember I saw this one book named Atomic Habits. And at the time, I've been hearing it all around the internet telling me that, oh, this book is amazing. I'm hearing like big content creators telling me that this book will change your life, that it's amazing. And I saw it there in my barber. So I just started reading, and I really got to read one page before I had to get up and get a haircut. But after they gave me the haircut, I was looking fresh and everything. I asked the barber if I could borrow the book and read at home. And yeah, he said, sure, yeah, you can have it. And the funny part was that he was telling me to like really take action. He was telling me you can read the book, but you really need to apply what you learned, which I found pretty interesting. But point is, I go back home and I started reading the book, and I was so focused and so attentive, because I actually was reading something that I was actually interested in. I was actually curious, and I was interested in what I was learning, and therefore it was so easy for me to remember. And therefore, one of the first lessons that I learned after so many years of basically just reading this book and not really learning much from it was that you need to actually pick the right book. And it's almost like YouTube. Imagine you click on a video and you stop getting interested in it. Like, let's say it's just a video about like, I don't know, like business, and you're kind of getting bored of it because you're like struggling with habits or whatever, so you want to learn about habits. You're not going to keep watching a video about business. You're just going to click off it, go into the homepage and search up like habits, or just click on another video that does interest you more. And it's the same with books. With books, the worst part is that you can be reading it and you might think that you're disciplined. Most people have this mindset that they think they're disciplined because they're reading the book, even though they don't want to, even though they don't even find interesting. But they're not even learning anything because they're just kind of forcing themselves to read it. That's one of the worst things you can do when reading. For remembering, for liking, learning. It's basically one of the worst things you can do. So if you don't have a book, think of a book that would interest you. For example, just pick a book that big creators have said, because those are really good ones usually. For example, How to Influence and Influence People, Expert Secrets, .com Secrets, Atomic Habits, Discipline is Destiny, The Diary of a CEO. Just pick any book that actually somewhat interests you. For example, The Diary of a CEO teaches about business and life. Expert Secrets and .com Secrets teaches you about business. Atomic Habits, Psycho-Cybernetics teaches you about psychology and habits. Now, obviously at different times, you're going to be interested in different things. It's not like you wake up one day and then you're just solely interested in business. I mean, maybe you do sometimes, but the point is like, you're not interested in one topic the whole day through. For example, when you watch YouTube videos, you don't just watch some self-improvement videos about one topic and that's it. You watch them about fitness, about health, about relationship, about wealth, about making money, about all these kinds of things. Your body will give you an urge to read a certain type of book. For example, let's say you're getting bored of reading psychology and you want to learn about business. Then go ahead and read business. Like, you can put the book down and won't be offended, because you're going to learn way more from a book that you do like compared to something that you don't like learning. Picture it this way. Imagine you have let's say you're back in school or you're still in school, but let's say you're in your science class, and let's say your teacher is just horrendous. Like, he's just boring, he yaps all the time, he just basically a horrible teacher. Do you think you're going to learn a lot if you don't like science because the teacher's really bad? Probably not. Now let's say you have maths, and in maths your teacher is very nice, he's funny, he's charismatic, he's just so fun to be around. You're going to be way more likely to learn from your maths class than your science class, because you actually pay more attention in your maths class because you like it more, wouldn't you? And it's the exact same with books. You're going to be way more likely to pay attention to something that you do like compared to something that you don't necessarily want to read at the moment. And the reason people struggle with this is because we've been conditioned to think this way by school. They've taught us that we need to read a book from the start to the end without skipping, without changing books or whatever. So we've been conditioned that way. And it's a horrible thing, to be honest, but you can uncondition yourself by just literally picking up other books that find you interesting. Put simply, just treat books like a YouTube video. Sometimes you're going to be interested about business, sometimes you're going to be interested about psychology, sometimes you're going to be interested about health. So the thing that you watch YouTube videos, you don't just watch a YouTube video, you click on it and then you watch all the way to the end, even though you lost the interest in it. You're not going to do that. Same with books. If you don't find it interesting, just switch books and read another one that you do find interesting, that you will learn a lot more from. Now that you do have a book that you want to read, that's basically like going to make you 10 times more likely to remember, to apply the lessons that you learn because you actually like the book. This is actually a very interesting way that you can actually remember the things you read, and it's literally using your own brain, the way it's like constructed, built to actually remember stuff from books. The way your brain works is basically just has a lot of neurons that connect to each other, and when you learn something new, it's almost like this. Your brain is just basically a massive web. All the knowledge, all the things that you've learned, all your experiences, all the knowledge you've gained, like basically everything. It's just all in a web in your brain. But when you learn something new, it's almost like a dot. It's almost just like this dot, and here's your massive brain web. And if you don't connect it to this massive web, it's just gonna crumble. This dot is just gonna crumble, and you're just gonna forget what you learned. So for example, you might learn from the How to Impress and Influence People book. You might learn to be interesting, you need to be interested. Now you might learn that, but if you do connect it to anything, to this big web, it's just gonna crumble and you're gonna forget it, and then you're not gonna apply it, and reading that was basically useless even though you did read it. And the way you connect this dot to your massive web is just linking what you just learned to other past experiences. Now let's imagine you have this dot, and let's say you have an experience right here, and you link it, and now it's actually connected to the web, and you link it to another experience. You're way more likely to keep this new thing that you learned because you linked it to the big web. Now it's part of the web. This is why analogies are so good, and you probably experienced this where you're speaking to someone, or your teacher or whatever, you're speaking to someone and they tell you something new, like they just tell you something new that you don't really understand, but then they say these exact words, it's just like, and then they tell you whatever, it's just like doing this other thing, and then you go like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. So when you're reading and you learn something new, think of how you can connect it to a past experience you've had or something else you've learned. For example, in the book How to Influence and Influence People, it says people don't like to get criticized, condemn, or complain, basically. And it was talking about how when you criticize someone, it really causes resentment and it makes you hate them. And I thought to myself, I've definitely experienced that. And that's because in school, whenever people get detentions, they always justify their actions. Even though, for example, it might have been like completely 100% their fault that they got the detention. For example, I don't know, they threw a glue stick across the classroom. Even though they like completely didn't, it's 100% their fault. When the teacher gives them that detention, they still feel a little bit angry and resentful to the teacher. They're gonna not like the teacher as much, and they're gonna be like basically angry because they got a detention and nobody wants to get detentions. Now, even though it's basically 100% their fault, they don't blame themselves. People don't blame themselves even though it's their fault. And that reminded me of that, and now I'm way more likely to remember that people don't like to get criticized because of that experience, and I've connected the dots where I've connected people don't like to get criticized to a past experience that I've had. And I've actually experienced this firsthand because I've gotten detentions before. For example, I remember this, it's going to be a little story, but I was in science class and our teacher doesn't really like it when we put our books away on the warning bell. Basically, we put our books normally in the warning bell, we put them and then we walk back to our seats, just like because you can walk around, it just feels nice. So he doesn't like it. He likes it when the final bell rings and we get dismissed as we're walking out. Then we put our books away. But basically, I got up and I was putting my book away in the warning bell. So he said, "Get back to your seat." And yeah, I had to because obviously he was a teacher and I was already on a reminder, and 2 reminders equaled an ASD, which is a after school detention, and I didn't really want to get one. So I was walking back to my seat, but he kept saying, "Get back to your seat, get back to your seat." And he was like kind of shouting at me. And I'm not gonna lie to you, my emotions got the better of me, and I literally shouted, "Can you wait?" Like in such an aggressive tone. And he ended up giving me a detention, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I tried to use every single tactic of How to Influence and Influence People, like influence tactic, every single one to get out of my detention. I was like pleading with him. I was telling me, "Oh yeah, it's just my emotions, I'm sorry sir, I didn't mean to, I was just trying to get out of this detention." But he didn't let me. He just was like, "Oh no, you have to get a detention because you need to learn," or whatever. And even though, yeah, it was 100% my fault that I shouted at him and I shouldn't have done that, and I kind of did deserve the detention, I still kind of hate him because he gave me that attention, even though I was trying to justify and everything. That experience, I'm never going to forget the point of people don't like to get criticized, because it happened to be firsthand when I'm getting a detention. I start hating the teacher more. It causes resentment. You don't really want to listen. You don't really want to obey to the teacher because basically he just made you feel horrible, basically. So you don't want to listen to someone who makes you feel bad, do you? And the way I think it works is always it kind of gets connected in your subconscious mind. So whenever, for example, I do see someone getting an ASD, I think to myself, oh, it's because the reason they are throwing stuff and getting so angry at the teacher is because they feel like it wasn't fair. Even though it might have been 100% their fault, people don't like to get criticized or condemned or complained. So I always see that through that lens, and it's like in my subconscious, and I can think of it like basically you just get reminded of it, and the more you get reminded of something, the more you just solidifies in your mind. So it's just like a good feedback loop. And the analogy that I gave you, where it's just like a massive web and this point, and you connect it to past experiences, it just basically makes it more sturdy and less likely for you to forget. Now, none of these tips are going to work if you're not even reading consistently, so I do want to give you a tiny bonus tip that I wasn't really planning on giving you. Every single night before bed, I manage to read about 5 to 10 pages of a book before I do eventually fall asleep. And those 5 to 10 pages are nice because I get to learn something and then I get to use it in the next day. The point with this is making reading a habit. If you're not reading like literally just at least 5 to 10 pages every single day, then how could you expect to really improve from books? Because you know the power of books. I'm not gonna lie to you, this single book I've abused. And when I say abused, I mean abused with a capital A when it comes to these principles. For example, most of the principles are smile, say people's names, appeal to one's self-interest. These tactics I've used in school so much that it's getting me so many friends, so many people that like me, and getting what I want. For example, let's say I want someone to give me... So I want someone to like mess around, just to have a little bit of fun in a class because I'm like bored. I tell them like, oh, do it because it's gonna be funny. Oh, do it because then it means you will get this. Like I kind of use those tactics, and yeah, it might not be the best thing, but because I read this book, I learned those tactics and I get to apply them. So having this kind of power is amazing because just because I read this book, I'm able to influence people, to have such an amazing life, with just a social life with people. Because before, I'm not gonna lie to you, I used to be like a social outcast. I barely even spoke to people. I barely even smiled to them, said their names. I didn't make them feel important. I didn't ask questions, and that just basically made me a horrible human, really. I'm not gonna lie to you. Until I actually apply these tactics and I've seen like people, I've gained so much more friends, I'm building way better connections. Think of it this way, if you read 10 pages before bed or at any time, every single day, for the rest of your life, like for example, you read 5 pages in the afternoon and 5 before bed or something like that, just 10 pages minimum every single day, don't you think that literally after 1 year, you will be way more successful than if you didn't read those 10 pages? Like think about it, you read 10 pages how to win friends and influence people, and over the course of 1 year, you manage to read it on average 10 books. I'm not sure if that's the correct math, but let's just do 10 books. 10 books worth of knowledge, and with the tactics I already gave you, so you can actually remember them and apply them into your life. Imagine how much more successful you're going to be in 1 year than if you just didn't read 10 pages every single day. Now, every single day, while you're reading 10 pages, it's not going to seem a lot. You're going to read 10 pages and you're going to feel like, oh, I didn't really learn some life-changing advice. But over the course of 1 week, over the course of 1 month, and over the course of 1 year, you're going to see really big, amazing changes. This book, it didn't change my life the first time I bought it. But after a few months, after a few years, it has literally been the reason that I've been so fun, so popular in school. I know that sounds a little bit cringe saying like popular. You get the point. And you do kind of want to get that power. Even though it's not very nice to know how to influence people, like just basically manipulating people. But you probably want to know that as well. You don't. You want to know how to manipulate people. But anyway, the point is to make reading a habit. So whenever you are tired or come back from the gym, for example, you might feel a little bit tired after you come back to the gym. Instead of grabbing your phone and just basically wasting your time, grab a book. Because actually, you know, something interesting that I found is that I'm not sure if this is completely true, but this is kind of what it feels like. Whenever you grab your phone, the reason you grab your phone is because your brain is bored and it just wants some stimulation. It just wants to learn something. And that's the reason most people's instinct is just to grab the phone because it's just infinite entertainment. But a book is basically the same thing. It stimulates your brain by actually making it work and learning some new information. And it also gives it knowledge. When I read, it almost feels as fun as when I'm on my phone. Because I think of it like I'm learning. Because when you're on your phone, you kind of regret it. Because you kind of feel a little bit bad because you know you're scrolling and you shouldn't be, but you still like it. But whenever you're reading a book, you're reading it and you know it's good for you. So it feels just as good as scrolling. And this is something that I've learned that has quite literally changed my life. Because before bed, for example, in the Diary of a CEO, it literally talks about exactly this. Instead of trying to fight the habit, try to change it. Something like it. Because it's talking about changing it. For example, he was talking about his father who used to smoke every single time he walked into the car. Because he had like a stash of cigarettes. But instead of cigarettes, he just switched the cigarettes with lollipops. And it was just basically a way better habit to just basically whenever you got into the car, just get a lollipop than get into the car and smoke. For example, for you, it's going to be instead of you getting back from the gym and just scrolling on your phone, or whenever you're tired or bored scrolling your phone, you're just going to read. because it has the same effect. Your brain wants stimulation and wants to learn something. That's exactly what a book does. It stimulates you and you learn something. And even if you literally just read 10 pages for the rest of your life, over the course of months, over the course of years, you're going to be way more successful.